All right. So for our next talk, we will have Dr. Chana Camille Vince Cruz. She is a faculty of the biology department and is part of the Crab Tech research team of De La Salle University. They help in the democratization of science and the science and the development of practical technologies for the advancement of Philippine agriculture and fisheries. She's the creator of the science blog Scientia, which is fueled by her advocacy for the improvement of communication between the scientific community and other sectors. She's got a PhD from Biology Department de La Salle and a MS from Natural Resource Management from the UP Open University and a biggest in molecular biology and biotechnology from University of the Philippines, Diliman. So let's hear it from Dr. Chana.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Chana Camille Vinci Cruz-Abelledo, and I'm here to talk about the importance of both traditional ecological knowledge management systems and modern biotechnology in order to establish sustainable agriculture in the Philippines. The new Sustainable Development Goals include a significant number of interconnected objectives related to food and agriculture. SDG 2 is the one that focuses specifically on food, and it aims to end world hunger, achieve food security and proper nutrition, and also promote sustainable agriculture. But there are other objectives that relate to the challenges being faced by the agriculture industry. SDG 1, for example, focuses on poverty, where agriculture and food play a significant role. Apart from that, sustainable agriculture plays a significant role in achieving several objectives, including SDG 6 on water, especially considering 80% of our freshwater consumption in the Philippines is due to agriculture. And then there's SDG 12 on sustainable consumption and production. But this is a huge pressure on our agriculture industry, considering our fishers and farmers are particularly more concerned about their own survival and productivity over employing sustainable practices. And then there's SDG 13 on climate change adaptation and mitigation. Imagine that 14% of our total population and 42% of our fishing communities are threatened by storm surges alone. And as for SDG 15 on land use and ecosystems, we have our indigenous communities that make up 10 to 20% of our population who are grappling with agricultural production as they face violence and the threats of land grabbing. Sustainable management of fisheries also feature prominently with SDG 14 on marine resources and oceans. But our fishers are seduced by the higher returns of the marine ornamental fish trade, which have lowered the survival and productivity of our reefs. But it's 2020, and the Philippines is still primarily an agricultural country despite plans to make us an industrialized economy by the year 2000. One of the most pressing concerns of the agricultural sector is the rapid loss of land due to conversion to residential subdivisions, industrial parks, or resorts. As early as the 1990s, we have been losing irrigated lands that could be used for growing crops by as much as 2,300 hectares per year, and it has been growing ever since. Also, with unsustainable practices, climate change, and disease, agricultural production and marine catch have decreased over time. But I believe that's where research and technology come in. Through the creation of practical technologies that can help our fishers and farmers maximize their production given their limited capital, we can significantly aid the agriculture industry of the Philippines. My first venture into agri-biotech was as a molecular biology and biotechnology student in the lab of Dr. Vermando Aquino. We were specifically working on biotech innovations for the abaca industry. The Philippines has always been a top exporter of abaca, but a combination of typhoon damage and blighting brought about by various viruses, our abaca yields have been reduced over time. Our team then, at the National Institute of Molecular Biology and Biotechnology during the early 2000s, were trying to find a way to create a variety that was immune to the abaca bunchy top virus. The abaca bunchy top virus, or ABTV, is the most injurious among the 3 common diseases that affect abaca in the country. The goal of our project then, as funded by the Fiber Industry Development Authority, was to create cultivars of abaca that was immune to ABTV. My primary responsibility was to optimize genetic engineering techniques for abaca, specifically the species Musa textilis ni. The method that I was optimizing was the gene gun or biolistics. The gene gun method works by firing microparticles like gold or tungsten coated with plasmids containing the gene to be introduced. The velocity and pressure from the microparticles allow them to enter the plant cells, despite the presence of the cell wall. And even if lignification were to occur, ideally, the plasmid has entered the cell first. What's tricky about the process is that too much pressure could kill the plant tissue that is being transformed, but too little could mean little success. The concentration of microparticles also have to be optimized to ensure effectiveness while balancing the cost. Our team was able to design an effective plasmid as well as an optimized method of transformation. But perhaps the Philippines was not ready yet back then. During the early 2000s and perhaps until now, genetic engineering has suffered strong condemnation from various groups, ranging from members of the academe to various activist groups. Farmers who were willing to try out the technology suffered vilification, scorn, and even terrorism, to the point that their hard-earned crops were burned to the ground. It's quite ironic that as GM crops all over the world burned, poverty and food scarcity remain as huge problems. It is perhaps fear or maybe a lack of proper science communication that has prevented this powerful technology from improving as much as it should. Considering all that, I decided to run away. I chose to take up ecology and environment and natural resources management for my master's. I thought it was important for me to see what natural systems had to offer in terms of maximizing our agricultural industry, as well as learn firsthand on traditional practices in the Philippines. But what really took me to the uplands was my research on REDD+. REDD+ stands for Reducing Emissions from Deforestation and Forest Degradation and the Role of Conservation, Sustainable Management of Forests, and Enhancement of Forest Carbon Stocks in Developing Countries. It is a set of policies that was negotiated under UNFCCC in 2005, and its goal was to help mitigate the effects of climate change by improving carbon sequestration through the improvement of the management of our upland forests. In the last couple of decades, various studies estimate that land use change, including deforestation and forest degradation, accounts for 12 to 29% of global greenhouse gas emissions. For this reason, the inclusion of reducing emissions from land use change is considered essential to achieve the objectives of the UNFCCC. Growing up in Bataan, I recall evenings where I see distant hills on fire as small-scale farmers and indigenous peoples proceed to do kaingin in order to do upland farming. And this is because they had no land of their own in the lowlands. So I decided that I wanted to pursue research involving upland rehabilitation in my own province. But in order to prepare for that, I had to learn about traditional ecological knowledge management systems. Traditional ecological knowledge, also called by other names including indigenous knowledge or native science, refers to the evolving knowledge acquired by indigenous and local peoples over hundreds or thousands of years through direct contact with the environment. So I decided that I wanted to work with the Evaitas of Orion. Now, part of the research was determining soil characteristics and measuring the biodiversity of their land. So in order to do this, we had to make makeshift tools that would allow us to do quadrat sampling, that would allow us to measure incline as well as water penetration. It also fast became a family affair where my parents, uncles, and aunties, and even my cousins would help out during field days. I think that was one of the most difficult things that I had to do as a student and a scientist, to explain to a council of Aita elders who were already defensive about their culture that their current farming practices were unsustainable and that they had to consider alternative methods. Leaving behind some wooden frames, some tin cans with holes poked at the bottom, and pharmacy-bought thermometers with the sangguniang kabataan of the barangay in order for them to monitor soil quality as well as environmental parameters was my first foray into citizen science, even before I was familiar with the term. Most of the folks I worked with during that time have moved on, but not before the Eva Aitas were awarded their land and found alternative sources of income for their community. Eventually, I would return to genetics, molecular biology, and biotechnology, but this time in mangrove crabs or the alimango. It started with an NSF USAID project and was continued through DOSTP CAARD, all under Dr. Menchi Ablanladman. Our initial goal was to do population genetics on Sila serrata or the king mangrove crab. It is the species that is most preferred by fishermen out of the 3 existing species in the Philippines. But as we went on field, we realized there are other problems that we can actually help with. Apparently, there was an issue with species identification at the juvenile stage, and this affects our fishers greatly as fish ponds are typically stocked with purchased or captured juveniles. The 3 dominant species in the Philippines have varying growth rates and market prices. So, cannibalization and lack of optimized conditions limit our productivity. So this led us to the use of molecular methods to create a non-molecular approach to identifying juvenile alimango. With collaborators from DLSU's College of Computer Studies, Ms. Cheska Laguna and Ms. Courtney Ann Ngo, we were able to transform this process into the free mobile application called Crabifier. In the past year, our Crab Tech team has been busy validating the application as well as deploying various technologies to the fishing communities of Luzon. We have been very lucky that the fishing communities of Luzon have welcomed us. We've had very positive feedback and they've informed us that our application is most useful for traders in order to prove that the species that they're selling is correct, and also to fishers who are just starting out their fish ponds. Apart from that, we've received requests about methods on how to check if crablets purchased from other locations are well suited for the environmental parameters of certain fish ponds. We have also collected information on traditional practices that they use to approximate the species of crablets, and these are currently undergoing validation. You can learn more about Crabifier and our other mangrove crab technologies in our website at crabtech.ph. A majority of the world's poor lives in rural areas, where farming, predominantly by smallholders, is the central economic activity. Large increases in agricultural investment will be needed both to raise incomes and increase the supply of food sustainability. And here, of course, we will need smart biotechnology that will maximize productivity while minimizing the carbon footprint. But in order for this to be accepted by our target communities, we have to marry the old and the new. We have to create a mosaic of traditional technologies as well as modern biotechnology in order to create a more sustainable agriculture industry here in the Philippines. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm looking forward to your questions during the open forum. Thank you.
Amazing story, Dr. Shauna.
Thank
So
you.
it actually, here we have an example of somebody who's done so many things given opportunities that were presenting themselves. Dr. Shauna, in your experience, getting from the lab to the field, getting from your research to the farmer, how, tell us about the experience of adoption. How far is it from actually being accepted? What are the general response on the ground? And what do you think are the best channels for such technologies to either be defined as well as adopted?
Thank you very much for that question, Doc Menchi. Um, I, I think this question is very much connected to what Sir Rene Pamintuan mentioned earlier about us scientists. If we're not aware of the problems in industry and agriculture, how can we help? And for some reason, I can't help but think of this popular Filipino meme asking, sinong mag-a-adjust? Sila bang farmers? Sila bang mga taga-industry? Or tayong mga scientists? And I would like to hope that both parties could. So, based on our experience, a lot of the communities that we're trying to help are a little wary of research groups and research institutions because marami nang pumunta sa kanila and after nilang i-entertain, after nilang tulungan, parang walang nangyayari kasi walang follow through, walang follow up. And this is particularly true for indigenous communities who are actually starting to feel like they're being used. They're being used so that we can research on them, we can publish about them. They suddenly see their stories on TV, but then nobody comes back to their community to actually help. So in terms of the research work that we've done and we've been on the field on, one of the major lessons that I learned is first off, you don't pop in unannounced. You don't go to a community assuming that everybody will welcome you with open arms. You have to find connections first within the industry, local government units, and non-government institutions who will introduce you to the community before you actually start talking about the science. My general issue with that is dependent on who you start talking to. It may become limited by political parties or familial ties. So parang kung ang nag-introduce sa'yo ay isang kumpanya or isang organization, yung mga ayaw dun sa kumpanya or organization na yun, parang ayaw ka nang kausapin. So you have to try and find the most neutral group first. And then apart from that, when you go in the community, don't go in with your guns charged and ready ka na, science, science, science. You actually have to start building a communication bond with these people. I remember a time when we went with COSCA, this is the social community arm of LaSalle in a community in Batangas. And the general advice for us was to eat with these people first. Because in the Filipino culture, ang pagkain, ang pag-share ng pagkain ay isang bagay na ginagawa among friends, among communities. And if you talk about their interests first before you actually do your research and data collection and deployment, they would be more open to these technological suggestions. And then it would be very helpful also to learn about their local languages if you have an ambassador who can do translations for you. But even then, your success is 50-50. Please remember that when we go on field, we are talking to a wide range of people, from very young to very old. And some of them have been doing farming or fishing for decades. And you come in, whether you're a young or old scientist, and they see that your palms are not hardened by hard work, pwedeng i-question nila ang credibility mo na mag-suggest sa kanila. So it's a discourse, not exactly me teaching them what to do. So we ask them about what they do. That's our current technique with the deployment of Crabify and other crab technologies. We go there in the premise that we actually want to learn from them. And it's true, we actually want to learn traditional practices of our fishermen when it comes to dealing with alimango. And we plan to actually find the science behind them if there is. And if they're not working, we actually want to communicate to these farmers na wag yun na munang gawin to kasi hindi siya ganun ka-effective at baka tumataas lang yung cost ng inyong production. So, and with that, with the humility of showing these people that we actually want to learn from them, they're also open to suggestions from us. So it's a process of give and take, and you cannot always assume success. But one of the best guidelines here is that when you start working with communities, you actually work with them for life. No, you don't leave them behind once you have that paper published. You communicate with them every once in a while, holidays especially, because agricultural science is also about establishing relationships with people on the field. So, yun po. Thank you.
Hey, thank you very much, Dr. Chona. And, coming from somebody so young, going out on field, sige lang, go. So